They say silence can heal. But that day, it didn't heal me. It hunted me. It followed every step I took down that endless red road, whispering things I wasn't ready to remember. The sun was high, cruel, and gold, like molten metal, pouring from heaven. And I, a man with nothing left, walked with the weight of failure pressing into my shoulders. My tongue was cracked from thirst, my heart hollow from disappointment. Everything I once dreamed of lay behind me, somewhere between the river I had crossed and the prayers that had gone unanswered. I told myself I would not stop until I reached the next village, but fate never warns you when it's about to change your story. The air shimmered with heat. Even the wind had forgotten how to move. Ahead, beneath the twisted arms of an acacia tree, sat a shape I first mistook for a stone. But as I drew closer, the stone breathed. An old man sat there, bent, unmoving, his skin the color of the road itself, his robe torn and heavy with dust. He wasn't begging. He wasn't sleeping. He was simply there, still silent, as though time had placed him and walked away. No bowl, no hand outstretched, just eyes closed, head bowed, body swaying with the rhythm of the earth. The sight of him struck something deep in me, a memory I didn't know I still carried. I remembered my mother's words, spoken years ago under a stormy sky. Never pass a soul who sits in silence, child. Silence hides angels and ghosts alike. I slowed my pace. My feet hesitated, not out of pity, but a strange pull that felt older than reason. The road stretched behind me like an accusation, urging me to move on. Yet, something in the air told me that if I left, the world I knew would close like a door forever. So I stopped. He did not look up. I knelt slowly, brushing the dust from my knees, and set my water gourd beside him. The gourd was nearly empty, the last of what I owned that still had value. The old man's hands were thin, trembling slightly as he rested them upon his lap. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the dry scent of earth clinging to him like years of forgotten sorrow. "Drink," I said softly, my voice sounding foreign even to myself. "The road is cruel today." He didn't move. For a long moment I thought he hadn't heard me. Then, without opening his eyes, he spoke. His voice coarse but calm, each word measured and slow, carrying the weight of someone who had spoken little and listened much. "Cruel roads," he murmured, "are the ones that lead us home." His words unsettled me. I couldn't tell if it was wisdom or madness, but the tone carried familiarity, like a song I'd once known but forgotten. He lifted his head then, just slightly, and the light shifted across his face. His features were sharp, yet softened by time, lines carved deep around his mouth and eyes, the kind of face the world stops noticing after too many years. But his eyes weren't of this earth. They shimmered with something impossible to name, sorrow perhaps, or knowledge, or memory. I didn't dare look too long. He motioned toward the gourd. I nodded and passed it to him, but instead of drinking, he tilted it toward me, insisting. "You first," he said. I hesitated, confused, but obeyed. When I finished, he took the gourd, sipped once, and set it down gently between us. The silence returned, heavier this time. The air around us seemed to pulse with the rhythm of two hearts. One too young to understand, the other too old to keep secrets. The wind stirred for the first time that day, brushing the dust into small spirals around our feet. Something inside me shifted, the strange awareness that I wasn't simply helping a stranger. I was standing at the edge of something larger, something waiting. I rose to leave, but before I could take a single step, his hand, rough, bony, trembling, reached out and caught my wrist. His grip wasn't strong, yet I couldn't pull away. He lifted his head fully for the first time, and as the dying sunlight struck his face, it caught the faint glimmer of a scar running down his temple, a mark identical to one I bore on my own hand since birth. He smiled, faintly, painfully, as though seeing me cost him the last of his strength. Then, in a voice that trembled with truth and time, he spoke my name. My real name, the one no one on this earth should have known. For a moment, the sky itself seemed to fall silent. The road, the wind, the trees, everything stopped. His lips trembled as he looked at me through tears that had waited a lifetime to fall, and he whispered words that shattered every certainty I'd ever held. My son. Sometimes, recognition feels heavier than love. It doesn't rush toward you. It settles, slow, aching, and unrelenting, until your soul starts to tremble beneath the weight of it. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The old man's words hung in the air like smoke refusing to fade. My son. They shouldn't have meant anything. He was a stranger, a beggar by the road. But the way he said it, the way his voice cracked halfway through the word, the way his eyes filled as if that single truth had been trapped behind years of silence, it rooted me to the ground. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was mistaken. But my throat locked. His hand was still wrapped around my wrist, trembling, yet his grip held more strength than it should have. His eyes met mine fully now, deep brown, but glazed with silver where time had left its mark. And in those eyes, I saw something I didn't want to see. Not madness, not delirium, recognition. He studied my face the way a blind man remembers touch. Slowly, reverently, as though every scar, every shadow, every shape of me was proof of something sacred. His breath shuddered through his chest as he whispered, "You have her eyes." I swallowed hard. Whose eyes? He didn't answer. His gaze drifted somewhere far beyond the horizon, lost in a memory I couldn't reach. I pulled my hand free gently, forcing a small smile. "You're tired, old one. You should rest." But he only smiled faintly, a sorrowful curve of lips that looked too familiar for comfort. "You don't believe me," he said, not as a question, but a quiet fact. "It's all right. Neither did your father when I first told him the truth." The name fell between us like a stone into still water. My chest tightened. I wanted to ask, to demand what he meant, but something in his tone stopped me. It wasn't jest or trickery. It was grief, spoken in a language older than words. A breeze stirred the air, carrying dust between us. The sun had started to sink, painting his skin in molten light. The lines on his face caught the glow, carving shadows that looked almost royal, like a crown made of sorrow. For a second I wondered if I had seen him before, not in this life, but in dreams. In flashes of memory that visited me sometimes in the quiet hours of night, when I'd wake to the echo of drums and a woman's voice singing my name through smoke. I shook the thought away. "You don't know who I am," I said, my voice harder than I intended. He looked up again, and his lips twitched into a fragile smile. "Don't I?" The words chilled me. I stood, brushing the dust from my knees, desperate to leave the weight of his gaze behind. "Rest, old man," I said. "You've been in the sun too long." He didn't move, only watched. Watched as I turned and walked back toward the empty road, my sandals crunching softly against the earth. Each step felt heavier than the last. I should have kept going, should have left him there, and never looked back. But something in the air shifted. A sound, faint at first, carried by the wind. A voice. His voice. "Your father," he said softly, though I was already a few paces away, "once walked this same road beside me." I froze. The words hit me like thunder rolling over an empty plain. I turned slowly, heart hammering in my chest. He was still sitting beneath the tree, but his face had changed, not in shape, but in presence. His posture was straighter, his gaze is firmer, and though the world around us was bathed in dying light, his eyes seemed to hold the memory of another dawn entirely, one I had not lived but felt in my bones. The silence between us stretched, alive and breathing. I wanted to ask what he meant, how he knew my father, how he knew my name, why the mention of that road felt like history folding over itself. But the words wouldn't come. My mouth was dry, my hands trembling at my sides. He didn't move again, didn't explain. Just sat there, his gaze locked on mine with that same unbearable gentleness, as if he were staring not at me, but through me, into something I hadn't yet remembered. The sky dimmed. The last light of the sun glinted across his tear-filled eyes, and in that glow, I saw something I could not name. Familiarity woven with heartbreak. When I finally tore my gaze away and turned to walk, his voice followed me one last time, softer now, trembling like prayer. "The same road," he said, "the same blood, and the same ending, unless you choose differently." The wind howled through the acacia branches, scattering dust across the horizon. I didn't know it then, but the road I walked away from that day wasn't finished with me. Not by a long shot. A village that forgets its ruler also forgets its mercy. And when mercy dies, even the soil forgets how to grow. By the time I returned to the village, the sky had turned to embers. The red horizon burned behind me, and every step felt heavier than the last. I couldn't shake the sound of his voice, the way he said "my son," as if the word carried centuries in its bones. I tried to convince myself he was just another lost soul, a beggar whose mind had wandered too far into memory. But his eyes had said otherwise. There was truth buried in that silence, and I could feel it stirring inside me like a restless spirit. When I reached the square, the villagers were gathered around the fire pit. Their laughter fell away the moment they saw me. I sat quietly among them, hoping the noise would drown my thoughts, but the weight of their stares pressed against my back. The elder, a man with eyes as sharp as flint, leaned forward. "You've been walking strange paths, boy," he said. "What did you see out there?" I hesitated. The truth trembled behind my lips, waiting to escape. "An old man," I said finally. "By the road. He knew my name." A murmur rippled through the crowd, the kind that travels faster than fire. The elder frowned. "Describe him." "Thin," I said. "Gray beard. Eyes like—" I stopped, searching for the right word. Like he'd seen too much. At that, the laughter vanished completely. Someone muttered a prayer under their breath. Another spat into the dirt and whispered, "He speaks of the ghost." I frowned. "What ghost?" The elder's expression hardened. "There's no ghost. Only a man who refuses to die." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "If you saw him, you turn your back and never speak his name again. He's cursed. A madman who once claimed to be king of these lands before the palace burned. He wanders the roads pretending to know the names of those who listen. He draws them in, fills their heads with stories, and when the night comes—" He snapped his fingers. "They vanish." A shiver ran down my spine, though the air was still warm. "He's just an old beggar," I said quietly. The elder's eyes narrowed. "Then leave him where he belongs. The living have no business with the dead." The fire cracked sharply, sparks flying upward like scattered stars. I stared into the flames, their dance reflecting in my eyes. Twisting, shifting, becoming something else. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw the shape of a crown flicker in the light. I blinked, and it was gone. Later, when the others had gone to their huts, I lingered near the embers, my thoughts restless. A king who refused to die. The words clawed at the edges of my mind. Was that who I had met? His scars, his bearing, his eyes. There had been something regal beneath the ruin, something that didn't fit the shell of a beggar. I found myself walking toward the old ruins at the edge of the village, the remains of a palace swallowed by vines and years. The moonlight painted the broken walls silver, the wind whispering through the cracks like the ghosts of voices long gone. I traced my fingers along the stone, cold and rough beneath my skin. Carvings covered the walls, ancient Adinkra symbols of strength, destiny, and unity. And then I saw it, a pattern carved deeper than the rest, one that stopped my breath. It was the same mark burned into the beggar's skin. I stepped back, my pulse racing, the night pressing in around me. The air felt thicker now, heavier. I could hear the faint hum of something beneath the earth, like drums buried under years of silence, waiting for someone to remember their rhythm. I turned, meaning to run, but a sound stopped me. Soft, familiar, almost human. A whisper. My name. I spun around, searching the shadows. Nothing. Only the ruined archway standing tall against the moon. I stared at it, my breath uneven, until a faint glow appeared within the hollow, pale and golden, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I blinked, and the glow was gone, but its warmth lingered, brushing against my skin like a memory. I stumbled back toward the village, heart pounding, sweat cold on my brow. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. They wouldn't believe me. They already thought I had listened too closely to ghosts. But that night, as I lay beneath the thatched roof of my small hut, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, not as a beggar, but as something more. The drums I thought I imagined began to echo again, low, steady, and familiar. I tried to block them out, but they grew louder, closer, until the rhythm filled my chest like my own heartbeat. And then I saw it, in the darkness behind my eyes. A throne, not of gold or stone, but of dust and bone, standing alone in the ruins of fire. A man sat upon it, his face hidden by light, and when he spoke, the voice was the same as the beggar's, deep, trembling, and eternal. "Come home," he said. "Come home, my son. Some roads aren't made of soil. They're paved with memory. They lie beneath your feet, waiting for the right heartbeat to remember their rhythm." That night I couldn't escape the dream. The throne of dust, the man shrouded in light, the voice calling me home. It all pressed against my skull, like the echo of something real. When I awoke, the moon was sinking low, and the air outside was trembling with silence too thick to belong tonight. I stepped out of my hut, drawn by something I couldn't name. The village slept, but the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a faint hum, low, rhythmic, like distant drums calling from the forest's heart. And then I saw him, the beggar, standing at the edge of the path, his form silvered by the dying moonlight. He wasn't hunched this time. His back was straight, his eyes brighter. For a heartbeat, he looked nothing like the frail man I'd left beneath the acacia tree. He looked royal. His robe, though tattered, seemed to shimmer faintly, the frayed edges glowing with a light that wasn't from this world. He didn't speak. He only lifted his hand and beckoned. I should have turned away. I should have run back into my hut and buried the dream under layers of reason. But there was something in his stillness, that same haunting pull I'd felt the first time I saw him, the kind that doesn't ask. It commands. So I followed. The forest swallowed us whole. The air was cool, heavy with dew and the scent of old wood. The moonlight broke through the canopy in thin silver ribbons, lighting our way. I walked a few paces behind him, every step crunching softly against the earth. He moved without sound, his feet barely touching the ground. The deeper we went, the stranger the world became. Roots twisted across the path, glowing faintly with veins of gold, pulsing like living things beneath our feet. I stared down, mesmerized, feeling their warmth rise through the soles of my feet. The beggar's voice broke the silence for the first time. "The ground remembers," he said quietly. "It remembers every step the king once took. And it waits." His words sank into me like a seed buried too deep to pull out. The trees grew denser, the air thicker, until even the crickets fell silent. I glanced up. The stars had vanished. The sky had turned a deep, endless blue. though the sun had not yet risen. The path itself began to glow brighter now, leading us toward a faint shimmer in the distance. As we drew closer, I saw it. A stone archway, half buried in vines and roots, its carvings worn by time, but still alive with detail. Symbols wound across its surface: suns, crowns, rivers, eyes. My breath caught when I realized one of those symbols was the same as the scar on my hand. "This was once the gate to the inner palace," he said softly, his fingers tracing the carvings. "The place where blood and memory met." "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice trembling. He turned then, his eyes catching what little light remained. "Because it's time for you to see what the world forgot." The vines covering the arch began to stir, sliding and twisting like serpents waking from a long sleep. Dust drifted from the stones as a low hum filled the air, not from the earth, but from the air itself. The ground beneath us vibrated, soft but certain. I took a step back, but his hand found mine, steady and warm despite the chill. "Do not fear what remembers you," he whispered. And then he stepped forward. The moment his hand touched the ancient stone, the vines peeled away, like silk caught in the wind. The carvings lit up, each one flaring gold in sequence, chasing one another around the arch like fire coming to life. I shielded my eyes as the brightness grew, spilling golden dust into the air. It shimmered between us like a storm of stars, filling the space with light so soft, it almost sang. The gate moaned, a sound deep and mournful, as if the earth itself had been waiting centuries to exhale. He turned back to me, the light painting his face in molten gold. "Your journey begins where mine ends," he said. "Step through, and you will remember what you were born to forget." And then, with a single breath, the gates opened by themselves. The air rushed outward in a wave of warmth, scattering the dust in spirals of gold. Beyond the threshold, I saw the faint outline of a palace swallowed by vines, its windows gleaming faintly in the dawn light. The beggar stepped through the golden haze and vanished. The forest fell silent again, but the dust still lingered, glowing softly in the shape of a crown. Power doesn't vanish. It hides in plain sight. Sometimes beneath gold, sometimes beneath dust, sometimes in the trembling hands of a man the world stopped seeing. The light from the opened gate dimmed as we stepped inside. The air shifted, heavy, sacred, humming with echoes of forgotten voices. The forest's sounds disappeared behind us, swallowed by an ancient stillness that pressed against my ears. The palace rose before us, not in splendor, but in sorrow. Its walls, once proud, were split by roots and vines, each crack filled with stories time could not erase. The scent of wet earth and memory hung thick in the air. The beggar walked ahead with a strange, reverent grace. His feet barely disturbed the golden dust swirling at our ankles. I followed, my pulse loud in my chest. Columns of stone leaned like weary giants, their carvings faint but alive. Suns, rivers, crowns, children held in the arms of queens. Each symbol shimmered faintly when I passed, as though recognizing something in me I didn't yet understand. We entered a wide chamber, and there, at its center, stood a throne. Cracked, worn, yet untouched by ruin. The stone glimmered beneath the pale light seeping through a hole in the ceiling, the dust turning gold as it danced in the beam. Despite the decay, the air around it vibrated with power. I could feel it. A pulse older than time, steady, patient. The beggar's steps slowed. He approached the throne and fell to his knees, his trembling hands brushing against its surface. His head bowed low, his voice breaking as he whispered something in a language I didn't know. Soft, ancient, aching. I had never seen anyone kneel like that. Not to power, but to loss. I took a step forward. "Who are you?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer at first. His fingers traced the carvings along the throne's arm, shapes that glowed faintly beneath his touch. "This seat," he murmured, "once ruled the hearts of thousands. It sang with songs of peace and promise." He paused, his shoulders shaking. "Until greed devoured it." The words echoed off the walls like a confession. He raised his head slowly, and for the first time, the light caught his face fully. The dust had settled in his wrinkles like gold filling cracks in a broken pot. His eyes were wet but fierce, no longer clouded by age or fatigue. "They called it the Kingdom of the Sun," he said, "because its people believed their ruler carried its light." He smiled faintly, a ghost of pride flickering through the sorrow. "But I was no light, only a shadow pretending to lead." I stepped closer, the air tightening between us. "You were their king." His gaze dropped to the throne again. "Once," he whispered, "before the fire, before betrayal, before I became what you see." He closed his eyes, and his voice trembled as he continued. "They came in the night, those I trusted, those I called brother. They wanted the power the crown held. They thought they could steal the light. They burned the palace, slaughtered the loyal, and turned the kingdom into dust. I fled through tunnels carved by my ancestors, carrying not gold, not glory, but something far more precious." I felt my throat tighten. "What did you carry?" He looked at me then, truly looked, and the air seemed to hold its breath. "A child," he said, "a child born of the sun's own blessing. My heir, my blood." His eyes softened as tears streaked the dirt on his face. "A child I sent away to live among those who would never know her name." My pulse quickened. "Why tell me this?" I whispered. "Why now?" His lips quivered with a smile too painful to hold. "Because the river has returned its gift." He stood slowly, his frail frame somehow towering. His robe shimmered faintly in the dim light. Torn, yes, but beneath the dust, threads of gold peeked through. He turned to face me fully, and for the first time, I saw the faint outline of a crown scarred into his forehead, the mark of a king who had hidden his reign beneath rags. I stumbled back, my mind spinning, the truth too heavy to hold. My hands trembled as my voice cracked. "You can't mean..." He reached out, placing his weathered hand against my cheek. "The night I lost my kingdom," he said softly, "I sent you away. You were wrapped in silk, hidden among the reeds by the river, carried to safety by fate's hand." His eyes shone with both pride and unbearable regret. "I waited all these years for the road to return you to me." The silence that followed was suffocating. My breath came shallow, the chamber closing around us. His hand slipped from my face as he whispered, voice breaking like wind over ashes. "I was the king who fled." He looked straight into my eyes, tears burning like fire in his. "And you," he said, his voice trembling between love and guilt, "are the child I sent away." There are moments when the truth doesn't arrive with words. It arrives through pain. It seeps through skin, burns through silence, and writes itself in the flesh where lies can't reach. That was how I learned who I was, not through stories or crowns, but through the fire that woke inside my own blood. That was the night my name was carved back into me. The chamber still trembled with the echoes of his confession. I stood between the shattered pillars, half-light bending across his face. The face of a beggar, the face of a king, the face of the man who called himself my father. The air smelled of dust and rain, the way earth smells before a storm that knows your secrets. I wanted to deny him, to laugh, to run, but the word father had already taken root inside me. Every heartbeat after that belonged to the question, what if he was telling the truth? He stepped closer, his shadow brushing mine. "You do not need to believe me," he said, voice trembling under its own weight. "The blood will speak where my tongue has failed." His hand rose, slow, hesitant, the hand of a man who had lost more than kingdoms. I flinched. Not from fear, but from the pull I felt toward him, a pull older than memory. "Show me your hand," he whispered. I hesitated. That scar had been with me since I could remember. A jagged bolt of pale skin that cut diagonally across my palm. I had been mocked for it, pitied for it, told it was a mark of misfortune. No healer could name its cause. It pulsed sometimes, faintly, like a second heartbeat. I had spent years pretending not to notice. But now, under his gaze, it throbbed. Slowly I opened my hand. The candlelight caught it first, then something else. The scar shimmered faintly, veins of gold flickering beneath the surface. His eyes widened. Without a word, he lifted his own hand, and my breath vanished. The same mark cut through his skin, identical in every curve, every edge, every shimmer of light. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent. Then he brought his palm to mine. The instant our skin touched, heat surged through me. Wild, ancient, merciless. Light burst between us, flooding the hall in molten gold. It wasn't gentle warmth. It was recognition, fierce, sacred, unbearable. The light threaded through us, wrapping us in a glued like a living. I tried to pull away, but the fire clung to me, whispering in a language a river carried. The lost child, and the one who had been searching. I saw him kneeling beside a pyre, crownless, broken, whispering promises into the ashes. When the light dimmed, I was gasping. My hand still pressed against his, my scar glowing bright as embers. He looked at me with tears cutting through the grime on his cheeks. "Now you see," he said softly. "The blood remembers even when the heart forgets." The ground beneath us began to quiver, faintly at first, then stronger. Dust fell like slow rain from the ceiling. The air thickened with the scent of rain and iron. I could hear it, a deep, slow rhythm rising from below, the sound of drums buried for centuries beginning to stir. Each beat matched the pulse in my palm. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice shaking. He smiled through the tears, a smile full of awe and dread. "It begins," he murmured. "The kingdom hears its name again." The tremor grew louder, deeper, rolling through the floor like the heartbeat of the earth. The vines on the walls blazed with golden veins. The throne behind us flared to life. The drums beneath the ground thundered in unison with my breath. The air itself seemed to breathe, exhaling centuries of silence. I tried to step back, but the light from our joined hands anchored me where I stood. The scar on my palm burned brighter, carving its glow into the room, like lightning frozen in glass. His voice was barely a whisper now, carried between one heartbeat and the next. "When the blood calls," he said, "the land will answer. And when it answers, nothing will ever go to sleep again." The last word vanished into the roar of the awakening palace. The floor split with light, gold dust erupting from the cracks. The drums rose from below like a storm breaking the skin of the earth. Every wall shook, every shadow fled, and I realized with cold clarity that this was no ruin. It was a body remembering its soul, and its heartbeat was mine. Memory burns when it returns, because it never truly left. It hides beneath the skin, patient as embers beneath ash, waiting for the right breath to awaken it. And when it does, it consumes not what you've forgotten, but who you thought you were. That night, the palace slept, or seemed to. The golden veins in its walls dimmed to a pulse softer than moonlight, and the tremors beneath the earth faded into whispers. The Beggar King rested in silence beside the throne, his head bowed in prayer. I tried to close my eyes, but every time I did, the air quivered, as though the darkness itself remembered me. My scar still glowed faintly, its light pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the land. I told myself I would not dream, but the moment sleep took me, it wasn't rest that came. It was remembrance. The world around me was fire. The sky bled crimson and gold, smoke rising in waves that swallowed everything holy. I heard screams, distant and drowned beneath the roar of flames. And then, through the chaos, I saw her. A woman running barefoot across burning marble, her robes torn, her crown fallen, her arms wrapped protectively around a crying child. The fire chased her like a living creature, eating the air, the walls, the kingdom itself. Soldiers in blackened armor closed in behind her, their blades gleaming with betrayal. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, but her eyes were the same as mine. She stumbled, but did not fall. Every step she took carried the weight of love fighting against destiny. She reached a great river at the palace's edge, its waters glowing gold under the reflection of burning towers. She fell to her knees and cradled the child close, kissing its brow as her tears fell into the current. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Live for me." The words echoed through the fire like a command to the stars. She placed the child into the river, wrapping it in silken cloth embroidered with symbols of the sun. The current caught it gently, carrying it away as the soldiers broke through the smoke behind her. She turned one last time toward the palace, and I saw him. The same beggar, younger, crowned, his eyes blazing with fury and grief as he fought through the flames to reach her. His voice thundered above the crackle of destruction. "Run." But she did not run. She smiled at him, a smile of peace, of farewell, and then the fire swallowed her whole. I screamed, but no sound came out. The river surged, the water rising like a wall of light, and in its reflection, I saw myself, the same child floating away, my tiny hand reaching for a sky I would one day forget. The crown she had worn sank beneath the current, its light scattering into 1,000 stars. The fire dimmed, the world falling into silence, and when I looked down, my hands were wet, not with water, but with gold. I woke up with a gasp. My body trembled as if I'd lived through the fire again. The chamber was still, but the air was thick, heavy with prayer and smoke that didn't exist. Across from me, the beggar king knelt before the throne, his face glistening with tears that shimmered in the flickering torchlight. His voice, low and steady, wove through the silence like an ancient hymn. I didn't understand the words, but I felt them. A song of mourning, of gratitude, of guilt. When he lifted his head, his eyes met mine, and I knew he had seen what I saw. There was no need to ask. The dream was not mine alone. It was memory shared through blood and grief. He rose slowly, each movement deliberate, his body heavy with time. He came to me and knelt, taking my hands in his. His palms were warm, his voice almost breaking when he spoke. "The river remembers what the fire tried to erase," he whispered. "Your mother's sacrifice kept you hidden from the hands that burned this land. The bloodline survived because love refused to die." I wanted to speak, to ask the questions clawing at my throat. Why now? Why me? Why remember after all this time? But the look in his eyes silenced me. He wasn't done speaking. The air around us hummed again, faint but rising, as if the palace itself was listening. He brushed a tear from my cheek and said, his voice trembling but sure, "Tomorrow, when the sun rises over the ruins, you will remember everything, not through dream, but through truth." The golden veins on the walls brightened, spreading like fire waking under ash. The drums beneath the earth began again, slow and certain, each beat echoing through my bones. The scar on my hand pulsed once, twice, and then blazed so bright it filled the room. The air trembled, and in the shimmer of light, I thought I saw her again, the woman from my dream, standing in the doorway, her voice a whisper carried by the wind. "My child," she said, "the dawn is coming. Nobility isn't inherited. It's earned where no one sees. A crown may rest on the head, but its weight is meant for the heart. Blood can give you a title, but only mercy earns you the right to wear it." That morning, the beggar looked at me, not as a king, but as a father who had waited his whole life for proof that his son carried more than his name. When I woke, the dawn was slow and golden, spreading like breath across the ruined palace. The drums had gone silent, replaced by the soft hum of wind through the vines. The beggar sat beside the broken throne, his face calm, his eyes filled with something deeper than pride, something that looked like sorrow disguised as love. He didn't greet me. He only said, "Every ruler is first a servant. Every son of the sun must prove he can walk through shadow and not forget the light." His voice carried no anger, no command, just truth, plain and heavy. I frowned, still trembling from the night's dream. How do I prove something I don't remember? He smiled faintly. By remembering through your deeds. Then he stood, taller than I had ever seen him, and raised his hand toward the door. Go, he said softly. Before you inherit your mother's crown, you must earn your people's reflection. There are 3 acts the gods require of the blood that claims a throne: to feed the hungry, forgive the deceitful, and defend the weak. When your hands remember mercy, your heart will remember its name. Before I could ask where to go, the palace walls flickered with light. The air thickened, the ground tilted beneath my feet, and in a rush of gold and wind, the world shifted. When the brightness faded, I was standing in the middle of a barren road, the same red clay road where my journey had begun. Only this time, I wasn't the one searching. I was being tested. The first came to me in the form of hunger. A group of children sat by the roadside, their ribs sharp beneath their skin, their eyes hollow but bright with stubborn hope. My pouch was nearly empty, just enough bread for one. My instincts screamed to keep it, but the echo of the beggar's voice tugged at me. Feed the hungry. My hands shook as I tore the bread into pieces and placed them in their palms. Each bite they took felt like something opening inside me, a warmth, a light, as if the act itself was unlocking a door that had been sealed by pride. When the last crumb was gone, they smiled, and for a brief second, their faces shimmered, not as children, but as spirits of light bowing in silence. The second came in the form of bitterness. By the river, I met a woman I knew too well, one who had once betrayed me for coins and lies. Her eyes dropped when she saw me. "You should hate me," she said, her voice breaking. I wanted to. Gods, I wanted to. But hate burned like poison, and I had drunk enough of it for lifetimes. I took a breath that trembled and said, "I forgive you." The moment I spoke, the river stirred, glowing faintly under the morning sun. The water whispered, "Wisdom." The third came cloaked in fire. A village nearby had caught flame, smoke rising, cries echoing through the wind. I ran, bare feet cutting against the stones, and found a small boy trapped beneath a fallen beam. The fire licked at my arms as I pulled, the heat searing my skin, but I did not stop. When the beam finally gave way, I lifted him into my arms and carried him out through the smoke. The crowd gathered, cheering, weeping, but the boy's form shimmered like the others. Before vanishing, his voice whispered through the wind, "Courage." The world dissolved again, the flames, the dust, the river, all folding into golden light that drew me back into the palace hall. The beggar stood waiting, his eyes wet with quiet pride. The marks on my arms glowed faintly, shaped like 3 suns, the proof of mercy, wisdom, and courage. He stepped forward, lowering himself slowly until his knees touched the ground. My breath caught. The king who once ruled nations now knelt before me. His voice was a whisper, trembling with both joy and grief. "Now, you are ready to be seen." As his words faded, the hall filled with light, not from the torches, but from the vines that wrapped the walls, each one bursting into bloom. The ground pulsed beneath my feet. The drums returned, not of war, but of awakening. I looked down at my hands and saw light crawling beneath my skin again, brighter, faster. The kingdom was answering. And somewhere deep within the palace walls, a door, long sealed, began to open. When truth stands up, even the wind bows down. That morning, the sky looked different, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The air was heavy, not with heat, but with waiting. Somewhere deep within the land, the sound of silence began to tremble, like a heartbeat remembering its rhythm. That was the day the beggar rose from the dust, and the forgotten drums remembered their song. The sun had just broken over the horizon when he called for them. These eyes were villagers who had once mocked his rags, who had thrown stones at his stories, who believed him only mad. His voice carried through the mist, low and steady, like the hum of a prayer too old to die. "Come," he said, standing in the open square, the hem of his robe brushing the red earth. "Come and witness what your eyes were never taught to see." At first, only a few obeyed. Then more came, drawn by curiosity or by some pull they couldn't name. They gathered in a half-circle before him, men with calloused hands, women clutching children, elders leaning on sticks. Their faces were hard with disbelief. To them, he was still just a beggar with wild eyes and trembling hands. I stood a few paces behind him, unsure what he meant to do. The golden marks on my hands still glowed faintly, warm beneath the morning light. Every part of me felt restless, stretched between fear and faith. He did not turn to me. He simply knelt, pressing his palms into the earth. "This land," he whispered, "remembers every footstep of its kings, every drop of blood that ever swore to protect it. You cannot silence what was born to sing." Then, without warning, the ground shifted. A low hum rose from beneath the soil, soft at first, then stronger, then louder, until the air itself began to vibrate. The villagers gasped, clutching each other as the earth trembled. The sound deepened, rolling through the hills, a rhythm older than any heartbeat. And then they realized what it was. Drums. But not drums made by hands. Drums that came from the earth itself. From the bones of the palace buried beneath their feet, from the rivers that had once carried the crown away. Every beat sent shivers through the air, through our lungs, through our souls. The villagers fell silent. Even the wind stopped moving. The beggar rose slowly, his back straight, his eyes brighter than I had ever seen. The dust around his feet began to swirl, lifting into tiny spirals of gold. His skin shimmered faintly, light leaking from the cracks along his palms and arms, glowing like molten sunlight trapped beneath flesh. Someone in the crowd screamed. Others fell to their knees. Children hid behind their mothers. But I couldn't move. The sight of him, the beggar, my father, standing in the center of that awakening storm, was both terrifying and holy. He raised his arms, and the golden light burst from him in waves. The sky itself seemed to bend, the sun flaring brighter as though bowing to its equal. His voice rose above the drums, powerful and clear. "For years, you called me broken," he cried. "For years you mocked my hunger, my silence, my rags. But I carried your kingdom inside my bones when the world forgot its name. I was never lost. I was waiting." The drums answered. Thunder layered upon thunder. The villagers clutched their ears, tears streaming down their faces. Some began to sing, not in words, but in sounds older than language. The entire village pulsed with light. Every crack in the walls, every blade of grass, every stone glowed faintly with golden veins. He turned then, slowly, deliberately, until his gaze found mine. His eyes were filled with pride, but also sorrow, as though every lifetime he had endured had been leading to this moment. The light dimmed around him, gathering in his chest, glowing brighter and brighter until his body seemed to hold a star. I took a step forward, trembling. The air between us shimmered. He smiled, the kind of smile that breaks and heals you all at once. His voice came low, but it carried across the silence like thunder hidden inside a whisper. "Before the eyes of the living and the dead," he said, "let it be known, my son has come home." The light exploded outward, swallowing the morning. The drums roared in unison, echoing across mountains and rivers, shaking the forgotten palace awake. The villagers cried out, some in awe, some in fear, as the golden glow spread through the land like dawn itself, learning to breathe again. And in that blinding light, I finally understood. The beggar was never seeking forgiveness. He was delivering a prophecy. Sometimes love hides in shame just to test its strength. It waits beneath the dust, clothed in silence, letting the world call it worthless, just to see if the heart it protects will still kneel when truth is stripped bare. The air after the drums fell quiet was heavier than thunder. Gold dust drifted across the square, glimmering in the morning light like the ashes of old miracles. No one moved. The villagers stared at the beggar, my father, his hand still lifted toward the sky, light still bleeding softly from his palms. Even the birds refused to sing. Only the wind moved, circling him in slow, reverent spirals. He stood there for what felt like forever, his chest rising and falling, his breath sharp and uneven. Then, without a word, he lowered his arms and reached for the coarse rags that had clung to him for years. The sound of tearing cloth split the silence. Piece by piece, he stripped away the fabric of his disguise, letting it fall into the dust. What remained was not the frame of a beggar, but the bearing of a king. Beneath the tatters were robes of deep maroon and gold, faded but radiant in the light. The fabric caught the dawn, like fire caught breath. Symbols of the sun and river, ancient marks of royal blood, were stitched along the hem, their threads glowing faintly as though remembering what they were meant to be. Gasps rippled through the crowd. One by one, the villagers fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the earth that now trembled beneath them. Some wept openly. Others whispered prayers they thought they had forgotten. The name they once mocked, the beggar who speaks to ghosts, turned into a chant that rose like smoke. The king lives. The king lives. I could not move. My heart pounded against my ribs, torn between awe and sorrow. He had hidden his crown under years of ridicule, carried the weight of a kingdom inside his scars, and still smiled as though every insult had been worth it. He turned to me then, slowly, painfully. The glow that surrounded him flickered with exhaustion, but his eyes held the calm of someone who had finally reached the end of a long road. His smile was faint, gentle, and unbearably proud. "Do you see now why I waited?" he asked softly. My voice broke when I tried to answer. "You let them call you nothing," I whispered. "You let yourself fade while I lived blind." He shook his head. "No, my son. I let them see that power wears no crown until it serves. What is a throne, if love cannot kneel beside it?" He reached into the folds of his robe and drew out an object wrapped in a strip of linen darkened by age. My breath caught as he unwrapped it. The golden crown, its vines twisted like rays of sunlight, rested in his trembling hands. It was smaller than I had imagined, but the weight of it bent the light around us. The people gasped again, their voices melting into prayer. He stepped toward me, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat through the earth. When he stood before me, he did not raise the crown high. He held it low, at the level of his chest, like an offering. His voice was barely a whisper now, each word trembling with life's last strength. "This crown was forged not from gold," he said, "but from sacrifice. Every link in its vine was a promise, to protect, to forgive, to love even when forgotten. I kept that promise in silence so that you could one day speak it aloud." Tears blurred my vision. I shook my head, stepping back. "No, I can't. You're the king." He smiled again, a smile that both shattered and healed me. "And a king's greatest act," he murmured, "is to know when to bow." He pressed the crown into my hands. Its metal burned warm, alive, pulsing with the same light that flowed through our blood. I felt its weight settle not on my skin, but in my soul. The crowd bowed lower, their voices rising into a roar of worship and disbelief. The drums began again, slow, mourning, sacred. He looked at me one final time, the sun flaring behind him like a halo. "My son has come home," he whispered, and before I could breathe, his body gave way. The crown slipped from my shaking fingers as he collapsed into the dust, light spilling from his chest like a final blessing. The drums stopped mid-beat, the world held its breath, and in the silence that followed, I understood. Love had not died. It had chosen to rise through me. The greatest inheritance is not a throne. It's forgiveness. Some inherit crowns. Others inherit the weight of remembering why they were ever worn. I learned that morning that legacy is not what the world sees. It's what the earth refuses to forget. The square was silent. The crowd that had once chanted his name now knelt in stillness, their voices buried beneath the hush of grief. My father, the beggar who was king, lay motionless before the palace ruins, his body wrapped in cloth woven with sun thread and soil. His hands were folded over his chest, still faintly warm with the light that had lived within him. I knelt beside him, the world blurring through tears I no longer tried to hide. Around us the dawn had turned to gold. The vines that clung to the palace walls shimmered, bending gently toward him as if the land itself bowed in mourning. The villagers brought offerings, bowls of water, baskets of fruit, flowers gathered from the hills. They placed them quietly at his feet, whispering prayers in languages older than memory. No one ordered them to kneel. They simply did. When I reached for the crown, the one he had placed in my hands before his final breath, it burned softly, alive but quiet now, as though it too was grieving. I held it close to my heart, feeling its pulse slow, its glow fading to a tender warmth. My voice trembled when I spoke. "You wore this in silence," I whispered. "You carried a kingdom on your back and asked for nothing in return. How do I ever repay a love that gave everything and demanded nothing?" The wind answered with a sigh through the ruins, carrying the scent of rain and dust. Somewhere in that sound, I almost heard him. The faint echo of his laughter, the soft murmur of his voice calling me son. My hands shook as I laid the crown beside him. The light touched his face one last time, as though the sun itself came to bid him farewell. We carried him to the heart of the ruins, the place where the palace roots had broken through stone, their gold veins weaving through the earth like arteries of memory. The soil was soft there, rich with life and death mingled together. As the villagers dug, I felt the ground tremble lightly beneath us, not in warning, but in welcome. When we placed his body in the hollow, the light from the vines spilled downward, illuminating the space like a temple reborn. I knelt at the edge, pressing my palm to the soil. My tears fell freely, darkening the red earth. "Rest, Father," I said. "Your silence has spoken. Your son has heard." As I began to cover him, the villagers joined, one handful of soil at a time, their movements slow, reverent. Every grain seemed to glow faintly before sinking into place. When it was done, the earth pulsed once, a low hum rolling through the ground, not of sorrow, but of peace. It was as if the land itself was sighing, "He has come home." I stood there long after everyone had left, unable to tear myself away. The world felt both empty and full, like a wound finally learning to heal. The vines stretched across the grave, their leaves turning silver in the sunlight. For the first time since his death, I smiled. Small, fragile, but real. Because in that silence, I felt him everywhere. In the wind, in the soil, in the steady rhythm of my heart. As I turned to leave, I looked back, one last time. The air shimmered faintly above the burial mound, threads of gold rising like breath from the earth. I knew then, that he was not gone, not truly. Kings do not die when they are loved. They return in the footsteps of those they've taught how to walk. Just as my feet crossed the palace threshold, a sound broke the silence. Low, slow, and steady. The drums. They began again, deep beneath the soil, each beat echoing through the ruins like a heartbeat reborn. The vines along the palace walls burst into light, their gold veins blazing brighter than ever before. And at the far end of the hall, the empty throne, the same cracked seat that once held my father, began to glow, pulsing with new fire. The kingdom was not mourning its king. It was working for its heir. Silence has a strange way of finding its voice again, especially when the world believes it's done speaking. It returns in the footsteps of memory, in the eyes of those who carry pieces of the past without knowing it. I had lived years wearing my father's light, yet even after peace came, the silence still followed me, not to haunt, but to remind. And one day, on the same road where mercy first changed my life, that silence spoke again. Years had softened the kingdom. The ruins of my father's throne had long been rebuilt, not in gold, but in clay and humility. Where once stood walls of stone, now rose gardens, markets, and laughter. I had ruled as he taught me, barefoot among my people, choosing service over command. I thought I understood legacy, thought I had already repaid my debt to the past. But legacy is not something you repay. It's something that waits, quietly, for its next chapter. The evening air carried the scent of dust and rain. The drums had gone still, their silence heavier than any song. I felt the pull before I saw it. That old road, red as rust, cutting through the fields like a scar the earth refused to heal. It was the road where everything had begun, where a beggar once asked for help and a stranger chose to stop. My feet found the path on their own. Each step stirred echoes beneath the soil, whispers of the drums that once called a kingdom awake. The sun hung low, wide, molten, bleeding gold into the sky. I remembered the weight of my father's crown, the warmth of his hands when he placed it in mine, and how, in the end, he had given me not power, but silence. Halfway down the road, I saw him. At first I thought it was memory playing tricks on me, the shimmer of heat, the sway of light. But then the shape sharpened. A boy, no older than I had been when I met my father, sat beneath the same dying baobab tree. His head was bowed, his arms wrapped around a small woven basket. Dust gathered around his bare feet, and the setting sun painted a faint halo around his silhouette. The sight stopped my heart. Every detail was the same. The angle of his shoulders, the stillness in his posture, even the way the wind curled gently around him, as if careful not to disturb something sacred. I approached slowly, afraid the moment might shatter if I breathed too loud. The boy did not move. I stopped beside him and lowered myself onto the ground, my robe gathering the dust. For a while we sat in silence, two strangers joined by a thread older than words. He kept his eyes on the ground, speaking only when the world seemed to disappear around us. "Why did you stop?" His voice was soft, trembling, and achingly familiar. I smiled faintly, not at him, but at the echo of another life. Because someone once stopped for me. He turned slightly, and the light caught his face. My breath faltered. His skin, the same warm tone as mine, his eyes deep and dark, like rivers that remembered the sun. There was something eternal in his gaze. Something I knew, but couldn't name. His small hand rested over the basket beside him, and when he finally lifted his head, the last light of dusk fell across his smile. It was the same smile my father gave me the day he called me son. I froze. The world fell away. The fields, the road, the air. Only the boy remained, glowing faintly in the amber light, his voice breaking the silence that had waited years to be heard. He smiled wider, eyes glimmering with recognition far too ancient for a child. "My son," he whispered. The wind rose suddenly, swirling dust and gold around us. The dying sun flared one last time, and for a heartbeat, I saw him. My father, standing behind the boy, his hand resting gently on his shoulder, his eyes filled with peace. Then the light faded. The road fell silent once more, and I was left trembling, knowing the story had not ended. It had only learned to begin again. If this story touched your heart, let its silence speak through your words. Share what it meant to you in the comments below. Your thoughts and feelings keep these forgotten voices alive, one story at a time. Like this video if you believe kindness always returns, even after lifetimes of silence. And subscribe to the channel, because every tale here is a reminder that no ending is ever truly the end.